in the Middle East has been stymied by the United States or other great powers. The United States just being the latest manifestation, but it's always an outside power to the Middle East. It's not a Muslim country. It's ends operating in their view nefarious ways to impose its will on the Middle East at the expense of the Iranians.
Iran has been one of the most frequent cited nations accused of practicing torture. It was widely believed that most of the political prisoners had been tortured by Savak, the secret police.
Despite the economic boom, they were having all sorts of economic problems, and I think one of the things that's talked about as contributing to the revolution, I think it did, was this very, very rapid changeover in the economy and the overheating, and the fact that they had to pull back economically in '77 or so because the things were just getting completely out of hand economically, so that people were unhappy with that, and also people unhappy with some of the crackdowns. This is, of course, more intellectual people, but the Shah creating a one-party system after he said he wouldn't, and Savak. People were very aware of, at least a lot of people were aware of Savak's arrests of people and jailing and torture and things like that. So there was this simmering of a lot of dissatisfactions, as well as this sort of turn towards a religious, even by people who hadn't been so religious, because the Shah was so completely secular and acting against the clerics and against traditional Islam and such. I think a lot of people went over to identifying more with Islam.
I think it's very important to add some other factors. Let me add a few more factors. One is, remember that the pillar of the regime, the really tough guy who really helped the Shah to be strong and as tough as he needed to be, and I think we have to be very sympathetic here. It was not easy to be the Shah of Iran, and the Shah, who was a weak character, found it especially difficult to be the Shah of Iran, which is what's wrong with hereditary monarchies. I mean, his father was a real tough guy. The Shah wasn't a tough guy. So who was the guy that made him tough? Asadollah Alam, his boyhood friend, the guy who was prime minister when I first arrived in Iran, and Khomeini was arrested, and the Shahs didn't know what to do, and Alam said to the Shah, go out and shoot these guys and you'll stay in power, and he did it. Alam died of cancer just before the Iranian Revolution began. So the Shah lost a tremendously important advisor.
In 1953, the CIA had worked to ensure the power of the young Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. During the next 25 years, the Shah often repaid the debt. He allowed the United States to establish electronic listening posts in northern Iran, along the border of the Soviet Union. And during the 1973 Arab oil embargo, he continued to sell oil to the United States. The Shah also bought arms from the US, helping to ease the American balance of payment problem. Few world leaders were more loyal to the United States.
There were voices saying, look out, this is not a stable situation in Iran, but I think there was a great concern in the Carter administration not to overlook the insecurities of the Shah's regime, but to handle them very, very carefully and not precipitate troubles. But for that, I mean, I hope you do get to talk to Brzezinski, because he had, I think he played a very lead role. There were voices, I say, I believe our then ambassador, William Sullivan, was one of them, saying things were not looking very solid in Iran, and this was a year or two before the revolution. In any case, in '79, this started, and our diplomats were faulted for not knowing enough about Iran when we had full relations, not sensing that the white revolution of the Shahs, as it was called, wasn't widely accepted. It was described as something very much welcomed by the poor, by the countryside, land reform efforts, etc. It was, it was billed as a success story.
The United States had, in effect, made a deal with the Shah that he would, in fact, protect U.S. national interests in the region, in the Persian Gulf. We had built our entire security system around that. So the news that he was increasingly in trouble was very disturbing, in the sense that we relied on him and on Iran, basically. But also, the bottom line analysis was, the Shah had been there for 37 years. He had a large military force, extremely well armed, much of it with our equipment, but other people's as well. He had a very fearsome intelligence service that was respected and feared very much throughout the country. He had lots of money, and he had relations with almost every other country in the world. He had, in effect, they owed him favors. He had done things for them. And he also was a major force in oil production in the world. So that, against a group of rather shadowy individuals operating out of the mosque with no arms, the analysis was that probably the Shah could defend himself.
I believe that the secret of understanding the Shah is to understand that, in fact, the Shah was a very weak personality who had a very low sense of self-worth, of self-esteem. He was not a powerful character. And the result of that was that he was, partially for good reasons, partially for not so good reasons, eternally fearful of being overthrown. I mean, one has to remember that his father was overthrown by foreign powers. One has to remember that he was the subject of an assassination attempt in which bullets actually entered his body. So that would make one pretty fearful of future assassination attempts. That was in 1949. One has to remember that in 1953, the United States overthrew Mossadegh with the cooperation of the British. Not quite clear what the role of the CIA was, what the role of the British was, but all that to the aside, and brought the Shah back to power. So if we were able to get rid of Mossadegh, we could probably get rid of the Shah. And he was always concerned about the fact that, in fact, he was not sufficiently important to America that he would be guaranteed to be kept in power.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, because you have Ambassador Sullivan, who's the U.S. representative in Tehran at the time, with a completely different view of what we should be doing, which is not supporting the Shah. And he would get in shouting matches back with Brzezinski and the White House on the secure telephone out of the embassy over what our policy should be, so loud that they could hear him in the anteroom. And so it was, so I think the instructions the Shah was getting, and whether it was some back channel communications between Brzezinski to the Shah might very well have been true through third parties and intermediaries. And the defense was sort of, as I said, Brown was sitting on the fence, kind of fluctuating. His big concern is how do we keep the Iranian military intact so it's still a valuable asset for the U.S. in the Cold War.
President Carter was willing to overlook the Shah's violation of human rights. Carter visited Iran in late December 1977 to demonstrate American support. He applauded Iran as an